even have a television. So I grew up without, any movies or TV that I was exposed to was always at friends' houses or family members' houses, not at my own house. I grew up kind of on a steady diet of, very classic literature, classical music, that type of thing. That being said, anytime I was exposed to films or TV growing up, stuff like Raiders of the Lost Ark, Star Wars, Back to the Future, it just totally captured my imagination, blew my mind. And I was just, I became obsessed with movies and television.
Well, thank you so much, Jacob, for being on the show. I really appreciate it. It's an honor and a privilege to have you, and I'm looking forward to kind of learning a little bit more about you and about your writing process and what you're doing now in the industry. So thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me. It's definitely an honor to be here.
Great, thank you. Well, let's get started. Tell me a little bit about what got you interested in storytelling and writing.
So growing up, it was, if you were to know anything about my childhood, this would have been the last thing you would have expected me to do with my life as far as a career. I grew up in a family that was pretty traditional, so much so that we didn't even have a television. So I grew up without, any movies or TV that I was exposed to was always at friends' houses or family members' houses, not at my own house. I grew up kind of on a steady diet of, very classic literature, classical music, that type of thing. That being said, anytime I was exposed to films or TV growing up, stuff like Raiders of the Lost Ark, Star Wars, Back to the Future, it just totally captured my imagination, blew my mind. And I was just, I became obsessed with movies and television. And the kind of, the gap between, my love for that and obviously going into it as a profession was pretty wide because I grew up in Western Wisconsin, kind of in the middle of the country. I didn't know anybody who was a professional artist. I didn't realize that was a job that you could do. That never really crossed my mind that, oh, there's actually people out there who make this for a living. Until I started watching a show called Access Hollywood, and they would occasionally interview directors, and they'd show behind the scenes footage of movies as they were being made. And so that kind of, that really sucked me in. And that's where, it kind of struck me that this was, was possible to actually do this for a living. So, yeah. So after that, I knew I had to go to film school. Of course, if you go to film school, usually it's in California, which having grown up with winter for most of my life, I was only too happy to come to sunny LA, where we get 300 days of sunshine a year, and I've been here ever since.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really cool. I think it's really cool to kind of see everybody's journey, and I sometimes we feel like there's, at least for now I feel like the industry is so saturated too, so sometimes it's hard to really break in there. Can you talk a little bit about that, like what you're like? I know it's like you're going to school, but then there's like a point where you gotta like, I'm gonna do this professionally, and like getting in there. How did that work for you?
You're right, and that it is everybody's journey is different, and people start from very different places in the world, and it is kind of one of my favorite things about this industry is that it does attract dreamers from every corner of the country, every corner of the globe, to kind of come out here to pursue those dreams and to do what they believe they've been made to do. But yeah, you're right in kind of pinning that there is there's a big difference between film school and Hollywood. The two experiences could not be more different, honestly, in my experience. I wasn't the best film student. To be totally honest, in college, I was doing a lot of other stuff besides making movies. I played lacrosse. I was I wrote the yearbook, I wrote for the paper, I was an RA, I did all this other stuff. And it just sort of hit me when I was a senior, entering my senior year, like, oh gosh, I'm gonna have a degree in this. I should probably, decide what I'm gonna do with that. So I did a program called LAFSC where you spend the semester actually living in LA, and you get an internship at a production company or an agency or a studio, they really do a good job of, or did a good job then. My experience was they did a great job of really, kind of giving you the baptism by fire experience of what it's like to actually live in LA and actually have, some access or exposure to the actual industry that, that Hollywood is. So I had an internship at a literary agency, and that was really a big kind of a transformative experience for me, because one of my favorite things that I got to do there was I got to read all of their clients' scripts. That's something that I would do on my lunch breaks, and it was so cool to be able to read all this material that I'd never had access to before. And obviously it's a lot different these days. Anybody who is in that position, the position I was in 15 years ago, there's so much available material that you can get your hands on. If you want to be a writer, just by, working Google, you can find hundreds and thousands of scripts, which it was a lot more difficult to get your hands on the stuff back then. And yeah, it really just, I just loved reading, the work of all these professionals. And that was kind of pivotal in helping me decide that this is actually what I wanted to, this is what I wanted to give a shot at least for, I gave myself a time limit, frankly, where I told myself, all right, I'm going to give myself 5 years. And if I haven't, made anything happen professionally, or, if I've really truly given my absolute best to this and I still haven't, there's been zero progress at all. Everybody has hated my scripts. I've never gotten a lead. I've never, I've made zero progress. Then I'll reconsider it and maybe, go be an accountant or something, or a teacher. I don't know. So yeah, I'm happy to say, within that 5 years, I had begun to option stuff, and I think sold something about 4 years in. So
cool. What was that project that you sold first, or like your breakout project?
So that was actually, it was the second script that I wrote with my writing partner Kenny, and we sold it as a pitch. It was a pitch for a version of the David and Goliath story from the Bible that was kind of in the big kind of bombastic style of 300. So 300 had just come out a couple of years prior, and we thought that was that style would be a really cool filter to sort of play over, honestly, one of the most compelling stories in human history that everybody knows. The global pre-awareness for that is about as good as you can get. And so lucky for us, Sony thought the same thing, and they bought it in the room.
That's fantastic. Were you nervous with the pitch, or how did you how did you prepare for that?
Honestly, wasn't. How Kenny and I prepare for pitches is pretty fastidious. It's pretty in depth. And by the time we, I guess these days we're on a Zoom when we're pitching. So it's a little different. I kind of prefer the in-person energy of, being able to be in a room with somebody. Yeah. But we practice it to a point where, we just know literally to the word who's saying what. And it's kind of like it's like a 25-minute performance, basically.
Could you elaborate a little bit on how you guys work together as writing partners? What does that process look like?
I think the best way to explain it is that one of us is weak, the other one's strong. And I think we're both fantastic writers, if I do say so myself. And we were actually doing fine. I was I was writing more in the comedy space before I started writing with Kenny. And things were going great, but then we co-wrote something together that was a passion project of ours that we had. We both love Davy Crockett, as you can see right there.
Nice.
And Kenny was writing a Davy Crockett script, and he was stuck, where we all get stuck, which is at the end of Act 2. And he's like, I don't know how to finish this thing. Can you come and give it, read it, give me some notes, which I did. And he's like, great. Now how about you write it? I was like, all right, man. So yeah, we joined forces on that Davy Crockett script, and it was a really fantastic experience to be able to write with somebody of his caliber and to see what he was going for in certain places where maybe he hadn't, written something as clearly as he could have, or or I knew I could add a cool line of dialogue. So we just, like the best partnerships, we made each other better. And it was something where we looked at the final product and knew, the whole here is greater than the sum of the parts. And Kenny he is fantastic at structure. He's fantastic at concept. He's probably one of the most prolific writers I've ever met when it comes to just generating a lot of ideas, a lot of material. He has an absolutely encyclopedic knowledge of cinema, which isn't necessarily my strong suit. But yeah, and where I would say I'm more of a, I love, a high concept like the next guy or gal, but my strength is more in character and dialogue. Is probably where I'm most comfortable. But when you put all those pieces together, again, it's a situation where I think we're, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
Yeah. I think that's really important. Because I really enjoy high concept films as well, but I think sometimes, they run into that problem where it's a great concept or a great idea, but the characters suffer. They're kind of, 2D characters, and there's not much substance to the story.
Totally agree. We have this saying that we use a lot, which is called epic in scope, intimate in approach. And
I like that.
That's how we like to approach really big films, because no matter how great the concept is, no matter how kind of jaw-dropping the effects are, or how cinema worthy the scope of everything is, if you're not identifying with the person who's in the frame, if you don't care about them, then it gets boring real fast. And I think everybody's had that experience in a movie theater where everything's blowing up or whatever, and you look over and somebody's sleeping.
Right.
And it's like, wow, that they probably didn't buy into the character journey. So
right.
It's your job as a writer to make them care.
What are some of your tips for creating a compelling character, or when you're approaching a character? Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think to me, the best characters reflect reality. And I realize that sounds pretty general and trite, but I think, there's resonance with traits that you see around you in the world that are either admirable or not admirable. I do think I probably personally respond most to characters who kind of have latent potential that gets activated through the journey of the film. So if you think about a movie like Romancing the Stone, the lead character in that is, this incredible writer who's written about all these adventures, right? Who's written all these adventure stories that are, incredibly, exciting, and journeys to far-flung places with crazy characters, but she's kind of a cat lady, right? Like, she's never really left her apartment. She just holes up there writing and imagining these things, but never goes out and does any of it. And of course, that's the journey she has to go on through the course of that movie to become the fully realized version of herself. And I think that those are characters that I respond to are characters who seem like real people, because we all have areas of our life where we have latent potential, right? Potential that's sitting there that hasn't been activated yet. And in order to become the best version of ourselves, you have to embrace the difficulty of unearthing that potential and bringing it to life. And I think that's why, another classic example would be Lord of the Rings, right? Frodo, who is just kind of a nobody, but he's going to go off to save the world, or Luke Skywalker. So I really respond to characters that strive to do really difficult things and overcome, obstacles internally and externally to kind of win the day or reach the end of the movie.
Great. And how does that how do you incorporate the plot with your characters? Do you do characters first normally and then plot, or do you do a plot first and then insert characters?
It's a little bit, to me, that's a little bit of a chicken and the egg thing.
Yeah.
In my experience, a concept sort of implies a character journey within it. And I don't know another way to describe it other than it's just, if I hear a concept, I immediately my brain autofills it with a character. And I immediately know a half dozen things about what would make a great hero for that specific journey. And I don't know if that, it's just pattern recognition from watching thousands of movies and reading thousands of scripts. But that's just kind of how my brain, it kind of auto-populates things. Where if I hear a concept, I'll kind of immediately get like, oh, okay, I see what the character would be or would need to be to make that a really compelling, to really breathe life into that concept.
What are some of your favorite things about the writing process?
Well, look, least favorite, I think most writers I'm sure have the same, we all have the same answer, which is it's really darn hard. And it can, I think the hardest part about it is that for me at least, I'm almost never not working, if that makes sense. Because my mind is always spinning on something,
right?
And you can sit, writer can be sitting in an airport staring off into space, but they're working.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like you can, it sort of never, that process never shuts off. So that can be, that's not my favorite part of it. Of course, my favorite part, would be like any writer, when you are, kind of squarely in a flow state and the world just shuts off and suddenly you have been writing for 8 hours and you have written 20 pages or something. And, you're just kind of keyed into something that's, you feel like you're accessing something that's bigger than yourself. And you feel like you're simply a portal for whatever's coming through you, and that the story is telling itself through you. I think that is, anytime I can spend any amount of time whatsoever in that zone, I really strive to, try to reach that as often as possible. Otherwise it's, just work, and that's totally fine too. Some days it's just heavy lifting, and that's just life. But yeah, I mean, I think, to me, I'm really obsessed with big ideas, and screenwriting is one of the most rewarding ways that I've found to kind of give life to the things I think about. And, that being able to do that for a living is just an incredible blessing.
What's some of the best advice that you ever heard?
Something that I heard probably early on in college, and didn't really take it to heart till, again, the kind of senior year of college where I started taking screenwriting a lot more seriously. But it's just writer's right. Mm-hmm. I think that is the best advice that a writer should ever need to hear. And it's something I always comes to mind when somebody asks me about, my career, and, they're thinking about doing that, or, they have a son or daughter who wants to go to Hollywood. And my first question is always about like, well, they say they want to be a writer. Do they write? How many things have they written? How many things have they finished? Because, you notice that out here in Hollywood, a lot of people talk about the script, how their great script, and very often it's easier to talk about something that isn't done, as opposed to actually sitting down to do it. So that's, to me, the proof's in the pudding. Writer's right.
It's just, you can't give up. I think that's the biggest thing. I think a lot of people are self-conscious, or because it is, like you said, it is very difficult, and sometimes it's hard to see the payoff. You can be writing for a long time before you actually get something sold, or whether you're able to pitch something, and that process can be really long.
Yeah, it's definitely something that it requires. I mean, look, it kind of in order to preserve your own psychological well-being, every writer should have. You need to have the correct relationship with reality, and the reality of wanting to do this as a job is that it's the numbers that you and I have a better chance of walking onto the Rams literally than we do of earning money this way. And so I think it's important to disabuse yourself of any kind of Pollyanna-ish notions about the industry or your odds of success here. The odds are not good, man. Like, you are storming the beaches of Normandy here. It's not, and nobody who's ever done this has said it's easy. So why should you expect it to be any different for you? So Yeah, I mean, I think as far as, having the right mental attitude towards how long it will take or what it will take. Um, One way to look at it that I actually have really taken to heart is from this thing that Conor McGregor said, the UFC guy. And he said this when it was fairly early in his career too. But I remember he said it was something like, I never lose, I either win or I learn.
Mm,
And I think that's a really smart way of looking at what other people might perceive to be failures, right? Or, what you might perceive to be failures. And this, look, I've sold a lot of stuff. I've worked in television, I've worked in features, but that doesn't mean, like, anytime Kenny and I take a pitch meeting, anytime we send a script out, nothing's guaranteed, man. We lose just as much as anybody else. I think the difference is we're doing so many things that we're probably, we take an absurdly high amount of shots on goal. So our odds are better probably for getting something in. But then we also, just like you said, we don't quit, because that's really the only time you ever really lose is if you quit. And I think, that's up to everybody, right? I'm sure everybody has, different points at which they're willing to sort of cash out and say, like, yeah, I took my swings. And
Right.
look, I've been in those places. Even I've been in the WGA for 11 years, and for probably, I don't know, 7 or 8 of those years have been really difficult. And despite being, quote unquote, a professional writer, there's still times where, it's easy to look at your bank account and be like, well, I don't know, should I, is this year I go back to school or get another job, or, so it really is different for everybody.
that's really good advice. Yeah, I think counting, kind of sort of counting the costs before you go into it, and then going into it knowing and not being uh, almost like lied to in a sense, or like where it's painted with the rosemary brush, where it's like, oh, it's going to be amazing. And like, I think going into it with a good perspective, I think it's better because you know what you're getting into. And then,
Yeah. And I think, as with a lot of arenas in our culture today, there's rampant survivorship bias, right? So you only hear the success stories from the people who do make it, who tend to be rewarded with kind of an outsized amount of, money, fame, whatever, status, whatever.
right.
Because it is that competitive of an industry. It's a really, really hard thing to be great at. And there's a lot of people, I think it's the numbers are fairly high. I believe it's over 60% of WGA members who sell one thing and never work again.
Wow.
Which is really sobering.
Wow.
When you think about that, it's kind of that adage of, like, even a blind squirrel finds a nut once. Doing that again and again is really the difficult part, right? And being able to, withstand the difficulties of going the distance again and again and again, and being able to move through entire seasons of a career where, you're going to have dry spells. It's like, I compare it a lot to, so I really am into the outdoors and hiking, backpacking, that kind of thing. And I always compare a screenwriting career to that, where it's like, man, some days you're just getting your butt kicked because it's just all up the mountain, right? And every step is torture. But then there's other times where things are going well, and your trail conditions are beautiful and sunny, the weather's great, you're headed downhill, and suddenly you're flying. So it's, it really does move in seasons, and having the endurance and the emotional resilience to get yourself through that is really it's an underrated part, I think, of the job that I think not enough writers talk about how important that is.
So what's one of your proudest moments in your career?
I would say I certainly the first thing we sold, David and Goliath, was absolutely a high point. Because that was still, I was at a time in my life where, I hadn't ever really made a lot of money, and that was a big deal. And, I got to call my parents and tell them the good news that this thing that I had been trying to do for at that point, I think I was about 3 to 4 years in. But yeah, they had been on the receiving end of enough phone calls where I was down to my last pack of ramen and having to figure out if this was the month I was coming home or not. But to be able to call them and tell them, hey guys, Kenny and I just sold David and Glad to Sony. That was a really, really, talk about high points. You only get a couple of those in your life, and that was a really special one. I would say another one would be probably being able to produce all of our episodes on SEAL Team. That was a huge, huge highlight. Just the level of craft that crew and cast brought to the material was so incredibly high. And obviously it's your dream as a writer to, and I don't know, maybe some writers just write to write, but I like to write and then make it. And being able to see how, be on set for cameras rolling on our words, and being able to look at the line of description in here that says, this firefight happens, or this vehicle blows up, this piece of action, and then getting to actually see that executed on set with a world-class cast and crew performing it was just a dream come true. I mean, it's literally that show was so fun to make. Of course, being a guy, a lot of guys grow up playing Army, and that was a huge, I always loved playing with GI Joes, and being able to actually kind of in real life get to see that happen on a set with words that I wrote was that was quite an experience.
So how did you get that project in the first place? How did that start?
That was so that came about. Our a mentor of Kenny and I is named John Glenn, who we had known probably since it was a little bit after we sold David and Goliath. We shared a manager with him, and our manager just kind of connected John with Kenny and I, and said, you guys, both of you have a lot of the very similar ideas. You think differently, you write similarly. You guys should get together and see what happens. And it's been one of the most rewarding relationships I have have had in my career. John is a fantastic mentor. He's an incredibly capable writer, and the level of professionalism that he brings to everything he does was really inspiring for Kenny and I, and we've learned a lot from him. He was brought in to run SEAL Team in season 2, and he hired Kenny and I on and brought us into the writers' room as staff writers, and we were on there for 3 seasons up until executive story editor. So it was John brought us in, and then we were able to be part of the team for 3 years.
Wow. Oh, what was one of the challenges that you guys faced working on the script and the story?
Well, for that show, it required a lot of research. Obviously, I have no military experience, neither does Kenny. We were really blessed to work with a lot of technical advisors, and we actually had a couple Navy SEALs in the writers' room. So we benefited quite a bit from their knowledge. But certainly portraying that world, and especially at a character level, the emotional reality of what it's like to be a warfighter, specifically in this era, kind of post 9/11, until now, that generation of special operators has experienced some really unique things that you really have to, there's no way to fake that. And it's obviously a very specialized and tight-knit community that you don't want to let down, because you're telling their stories. And for folks like Kenny and I, who of course we have family members who've served, and both grew up very patriotic, it's really important to get that right. So I think we were able to do that. Kenny and I were really blessed to co-write with one of the writers, Spencer. In season 2, we did an episode about specifically about PTS and just what it's like for these guys who get out or who are medically retired from the SEAL teams, what life is like for them afterwards, and oftentimes the obstacles that they face, which for some of them are just insurmountable, and they end up taking their own lives. So that was a really powerful episode to work on. And I can say, the feedback we've gotten from folks who either have family members who've gone through that or who have been through it themselves was so resoundingly positive. And that was really just, it was such an honor to be able to tell that story.
I would love to jump back into your routine for just a little bit, and kind of like walk me through like what a normal day looks like for you.
Yeah, I mean, a normal day very often involves Kenny and I touching base early in the day, between 8 or 9, just to keep, to kind of keep track of everything that we have going on. To give you a glimpse into what that looks like, right now we probably have 7 or 8 pieces of active business, whether that is pitches, TV pilots, TV pitches, feature pitches, or feature scripts at various levels. And that level of kind of execution and generation is really meant to hopefully bulwark against the, just how long it takes deals to come together these days. It's something we've noticed post-COVID. Studios are asking for stuff that is fully packaged. They want an entire movie together, not just, they don't just buy scripts anymore, or they don't just buy pitches. So, that means it's going to take you an extra 6 months to a year to get an actress or actor attached, get a director attached, and that's after getting ideally some, a high level producer attached, or a fan, somebody at the studio who likes it. So yeah, it's just things have been taking a lot longer. So we have been generating a lot more stuff and just trying to keep everything moving at once. So yeah, usually Kenny and I will touch base early in the day, and then I will, write throughout the morning. For the past couple of years, my wife has been working from home, so I get to have lunch with her, which is great, and we take our dog for a walk, and then usually I'll do some form of workout. I find that is kind of essential for just for being able to sit at a desk for 6 to 7 hours a day and write. For me to stay sane, I have to move my body. So yeah, I either go for a run or lift weights or whatever. And then that's usually done by 6 or 7. And that's the schedule when I'm kind of home, and Kenny and I are not we're not on a show right now. If we were on a show, then obviously you would be spending the bulk of your day in the writer's room. And during COVID, we were on staff during the first year of COVID, and so half the day was spent in a writer's room on Zoom, which can be pretty tiring. It's a lot more tiring than doing it in person. So usually by that, we kind of cut the hours down a little bit. So we did, like a 2.5 hour session in the morning and a 2-hour session in the afternoon, as opposed to if you're in person on a writing staff, usually the day is a little bit longer. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the rough, roughly what it's like.
What do writers' rooms normally look like for you?
Look, it's coming from features, I was never a huge, working on a writing staff never really interested me. I was always more of I want to, kind of lone wolf this and do it myself. Of course, obviously, then I got a writing partner, so right. I haven't written anything alone for a long time. But I found it to be incredibly rewarding and just an immense amount of fun to, and obviously this is the caveat, we had a great staff on SEAL team, and, we really became a family over the course of the years we were there. And it again, like any great partnership, like I talked about with Kenny, it really is a phenomenon where the whole is, better than the sum of its parts. And it really is kind of a magical experience sometimes to have a room full of really smart writers who are trying to crack, one specific thing, whether it's, a structural issue in an episode or a character beat or a storyline, whatever. And to kind of be a part of that, it's almost like you kind of create a hive mind that is able to solve stuff that, you alone would never be able to do. So I think when writers' rooms are at their best, it's really a a fantastic experience and really rewarding. And, just given the volume of work that's necessary for, to produce 22 episodes of television, that's a lot of work, man. And so it really does require a lot of brains going into it. When you hear about folks like Aaron Sorkin, who like single-handedly wrote entire seasons of The West Wing, it's like, man, that just is impossible without a ton of drugs. So yeah, that's why we have writers' rooms.
Right. Cool. So I think we're gonna wrap this up pretty soon. But do you have maybe some advice for writers? I know we talked a little bit about before, like kind of knowing the difficulties that come with being a writer. Do you have any other maybe tips or advice for young writers?
Yeah, I mean, I think going back to the advice I referenced earlier, writers write. If that really is the job, and the only way to achieve kind of the level of proficiency that is going to allow you a career in this business, the only way to do that is work. It's just to do it. And I think, if I were to give advice to sort of my younger self as a writer, first and foremost would be to quit bad ideas faster. I can't tell you how much time I wasted early on writing crappy ideas, and just because I'm stubborn, having to pound through it when it just wasn't there just wasn't a movie there, or there just wasn't ever going to be anything great there. And of course, obviously the only way to learn that, unfortunately, is by making that mistake and spending those weeks or months unnecessarily on something that never bore fruit. But yeah, I think just being a little bit easier on myself and allowing myself to say, like, sometimes if an idea isn't worth writing, you find out, halfway through, and it's okay to quit that. Like, it's okay to, move on to something else. Now, similarly, of course, sometimes you really do just need to push through to unlock, some scene or piece of it that sort of puts the rest of the story in a new light. Suddenly you get it. So I realize there's two sides to that advice, but I really do think, early on, it's just out of stubbornness, I probably spent some time on ideas that weren't worth that.
How do you tell when it's a bad idea or when it's a good idea? Sometimes you just have to muscle through it to see if it's a good idea.
Yeah, I guess, maybe the only way to learn that is to do it the hard way.
Well, thank you so much. Did you have any other final thoughts or last things before we wrap this up?
Anybody out there who's kind of in their end of Act 2 with their writing career and wondering if they're going to make it, just encouragement to keep on keeping on. And it can be a lonely career for sure. So, don't forget to find kind of folks around you who can support you, and if nothing else, at least take your mind off Act 2.
All right, guys, thank you so much for watching this episode of About Story Podcast. It was a pleasure and honor to have Jacob with us, and we will see you guys next time.